So we are now ready to use our filter component in order to fetch records from a database based on whatever has been submitted with our search form. The first thing we are going to do is to cut this entire array from within a search.php file, which you've got right in the root of your project. Let's cut it off, and we are going to create a new variable called filters, and this is what we're going to pass through as this argument. So filters equals, and now we paste this array. Now what we're going to do next, before we go any further, let's open index.php as well, and let's cut this books instantiation here and call to this books method, and also paste it within this search.php, because later on we are going to add another method to this book model and so on, basically, so that we can actually filter these records. So let's keep everything in one place. So rather than having this in index.php, we now have it inside of the search.php file. Okay, so to start with, for the keyword, how we would like to filter the result, basically, what sort of filter we want to apply in order to fetch the record by what exactly. So we're going to start with a new filter, and let's just import this class here as well. So if I just expand this, you can see the filter has been added with the use statement here. Okay, and for this filter I want to use like %both, so new like %both, and again let's import this one as well. Let's just organize them a little bit better. Container this way. I think this two could go a little bit lower here. Okay, and we are going to be looking for fields books title. On the books table, we want to search by title and the description. And then how we want to concatenate them. For the alter concatenator, we want to use new concat end wrap. Import class again. And for the inner, new concat or. And let me just explain in just a second what this is going to do. Okay, so again, let's reorganize these ones. There we go, something like this. Now, what's going to happen here? We want to make sure that when we're searching and we put some value into the keyword field, we want to search by title and description. And we want to make sure that this picks the part of the title and description rather than the whole precise word. So if we type, let's say, view, we would like to be able to get results which contain, let's say, I don't know, house with the view or something, house with the view. We would like to be able to get the book with this title, or if there is a view in the description anywhere. That's why we're using percentage on both sides. So the value, if we type view, is going to be in between the two percentage symbols. And for the alter, we want to make sure that it's using end keyword and it's wrapped within a set of brackets. So for instance, end title, books title, like, and then it would be value, for instance, and then for the inner we have or, so it would be or books description like value. So this is basically, this is what this combination of the filter would produce for us. Okay, then for the category, what I'd like to have, new filter again, and this time we are going to have just one item here. We're looking for new equals because we want the ID which is going to be submitted again. Let's import this class here. Let's move it down here altogether. For category, we're going to submit the ID of the record. So we want to make sure that this ID is equal rather than has percentage on both sides and uses the like keyword. So this time we want to make sure that it equals to, actually let's leave it on one line, books category ID. And for the alter concatenator, we're going to use new concat end without wrapping anything. Again, let's import this one and let's move it here. So this category, when we're going to have it within a statement, we're not wrapping this within the brackets, so it's going to be end, for instance, category books category ID equals whatever it equals. So this filter will produce this sort of statement. Now for the author, the situation is going to be slightly different. So new filter again, but what's happening here is authors as well as languages, cover, and locations are associated with the book using the join table, because there may be multiple authors per book. That's why we have a join table in between, rather than S category, just a single category that's going to be associated with the book, which is where we have category ID directly on a books table. We don't, however, have author ID on the books table because we are connecting them together using the joint table in between. Okay, so to make sure that this works, what we want to happen when we submit the form, and form will submit the author ID with the request. What we want to make sure is that we get the books that are connected with this author. So we need to actually look for the record based on this joint table in between. So to do it, we're going to use the new exists query. And let's just import this class as well. And within this exists, let's just move this down here, equals exists. And within this exists, we need to say which field we want to look by, and it's going to be books table ID. And then we need to provide the pivot class. So new pivot exist equals. Let's import this class as well. Let me just check where it went. It went here. There we go, subquery. For our pivot exists equals constructor, we need to add table first of all. So author book. Then we have a field to be selected, so book ID. Then for the where clause, author ID, which needs to equal to whatever we've submitted with the form, which is going to send the author ID with the request. And then what field should we compare this book ID with later on? So book ID. That's what we're looking for. And I'm going to explain exactly what this is going to do in just a second. So let's start from the beginning. Exists. If we click on this class, what do we get? We get the keyword exist, and we override this subquery statement with exists, and then within a bracket, we have this subquery which we're passing through as a second argument. Okay. So our statement will look something like this, and I'm going to put it here within the double quotes. So we definitely start with exists and then set of brackets. What happens next? This subquery, if we click on this subquery, pivot exists equals, and obviously this one doesn't have anything because it's equals, which is the default operand on our pivot table. If you look here, equals is the different one for the operand. Okay, so now looking at this exists, what do we have? We are passing all these 4 arguments, which we did, including this author field. And then we run the query, which takes the default statement. If I go back to the pivot and open this statement, which is basically select field, which is the second argument we're passing through, from table, which is the first argument we're passing through, where field, third argument passing through, then operand, in our case is going to be equals, question mark. So let's add this to our statement here. So select, we're starting with the book ID, the second argument. Then we're gonna go for where clause, author ID, so, which is the third argument, author ID equals question mark. That's what we've got up to now by just running this statement from within this query method. Then we append end. So let's add this end. And after this end, we have select field, which is our second argument. So second argument was book ID. So end book ID, and then we have, again, going back to pivot exists, equals symbol, and then author field. So let's go back. So that's going to be end book ID equals symbol, and then author field was this last item, the fourth argument. So it's books ID. So it's books ID. Obviously, we have it formatted this way because if we go back, you remember we're using this field name, which is going to add this backtick, split them using the full stop in between, and so on. So this is what this section here will produce and on this specific filter. So exists within whatever this selection here, the select statement is going to return. If it doesn't return anything, then none of the records will be returned. Obviously, this will only happen if because we haven't finished with this author yet, so this is the first argument that we provided here, if everything depends on what outer concatenator I'm going to use, and I'm going to use new concat end here, so that is going to affect whether the record is going to be returned or not. If we going to have author within the request, only those records which actually match this author ID, which those book records which have this author associated with them, will be returned. If this exist statement, this select here, will return null, then none of the books is going to be returned. There will be no records returned, basically, because we are strictly saying that we want to make sure that this is actually end concatenated with the end. So if we have a statement, there's some where clause with some other filter, and then we say end, this condition is also mandatory. It needs to satisfy this condition as well. That's why we're using this concat end. If it was or, then it could be ignored. If the first condition, for instance, returned true, then obviously this would be just an additional condition which does not have to be obviously satisfied in order to return any records. It would be just an optional, in other words. But because we're using concat end on the outside, that's why it is obviously crucial that this select statement returns something in order for us to return any records. Okay, I hope that makes sense here. So I'm going to remove this unnecessary statement here. Okay, so after this one, we have year. For the year, we're going to create new filter as well. Within this filter, we're going to, oops, not like this. Within the filter, we're going to put the array as the first argument again. This new equals, and we're going for the books year field, and then on the outside we want to concatenate it with new concat end as well. So if there is year with the sent with the request, make sure that this is also a mandatory requirement for to filter our record. Okay, then for the language, and let me just scroll up a little bit here. For the language, we have new filter as well, and this filter, again, array as the first argument. For the language, we're going to have exists again. So I'm going to actually copy what we have here, this first one, and it's going to be also concatenated with end on the outside. So let's just use it like this. Now, books ID as well, because we're using a joint table. This time the joint table name is going to be a book language. So rather than author book, it's going to be book language, which is where the language, there we go, which is where we concatenate, and basically we're joining two records together. We're looking for the book ID, then rather than author ID, this time it's going to be a language ID, and then for the end within the where clause, we're looking again for the books ID. So exactly same situation as before. The only difference is going to be that we're looking for the books book language within the book language, and then obviously language ID submitted with the request with the form needs to match the language ID field within this joint table. Okay, then for the cover, similar situation. So I'm just going to copy all this. Again, new filter, and within this filter, if I paste it, this time rather than book language, it's going to be book cover, book ID, and now cover ID for the third argument, cover ID and books ID here. Again, we're concatenating with the end, so it's going to be a required filter if the value has been submitted. And then again, for the location, similar situation, but rather than books cover, we're going to have book cover. It's going to be book location this time. Location, then book ID, location ID field, and this obviously book ID must match this book ID from the books table. Okay, and again, concatenated with end here. Now, before we wrap up, let's quickly have a look at what we have here. We have these filters. Each filter takes 3 arguments, but we only provide 3 arguments for this first one for the keyword. This is because the last third argument is only used when you have more than one query within this first argument array. Obviously here we're going to check whether the title or description, because we're using concat or, equals the value with the percentage symbol on both sides. It doesn't equal, actually, it's like the value with the percentage on both sides. Now for the category and all the other ones, we're using this concat end for the author concatenator. And as we may remember, if we click on filter, you'll see if we don't pass any value, if it's set to null, then it's the concat end is the default one. It's entirely up to you if you want to remove this second argument from all of these other filters. But in this specific scenario, I'm going to keep it like this because I can see straight away what sort of concatenator I'm using. And obviously, if I change my mind at some point, I can always replace it. But it's entirely up to you. You don't have to have it because the concat end is the default one on the filter anyway. So that's it in this video. In the following one, we are going to have a look at how we can use all these filters with the book class in order to return only the records that we've requested using our search form.